Hey, what is going on, guys? I know that I've been gone for a long while, but welcome back to another video. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about Borderlands 3, which is coming out in less than a month as of this video, but more specifically the playable Vault Hunters that are going to be in Borderlands 3, and I wanted to give you guys a series of videos with some preliminary builds for all of them. If you don't know anything about the Vault Hunters or their skill trees and want to keep it as a sort of surprise for when the game comes out and you play for yourself, then click away from this video. But if you do want to see what they're all about and kind of get an idea for who you might want to play first, these videos are for you. I would also like to tell you that all of their skill trees with all of their skills are available on the Borderlands website, so you can go and check it all out for yourself. I will leave a link in the description where you can do just that. And I will also leave a link to each of the builds I will be showcasing in these videos in case you want to see the breakdowns yourself. Before I get into the actual builds, I want to preface all of this by saying that these are just theories. We don't really know the nature of how the levels in Borderlands 3 might play out, how the enemies might affect the way we spec our characters due to their behaviors. We don't know what items are going to be in the game, which legendaries, or at least all of the legendaries that are going to be in the game, how the raid bosses are going to be, etc. So take all of what I'm going to tell you with a grain of salt. These are just the builds that I am going to be speccing into and what I think are actually going to be really good in the game, just basing it off of my experience with the Borderlands franchises that I've had for thousands upon thousands of hours. I'd also like to note that there are a lot of skills and augments in Borderlands 3, so I'm going to explain the objectives of each build and which skills I'm going to pick and why I'm picking them, but I'm not going to go over every single skill in full detail in every single tree for every single character, because that video would just be way too long. So without further ado, let's get started. Today we are starting off with Amara, the stand. Sorry, I mean the Siren. Like all previous Sirens, she is all about elemental damage. However, she is also this game's melee character. So I actually have two builds for her. The first one is an elemental, melee-focused, action skill heavy DPS build using her Phase Slam action skill. This deals damage in an area and knocks enemies up into the air, which is decent CC, but you could alternatively swap to Fracture, which summons a line of fists in front of you, or, to a lot of people's claim, you could also use the Astral Projection action skill, which deals a fair bit amount of damage. But since we're gonna be in close quarters a lot of the time, I do think the Slam is going to be the one that comes in handy the most. For this build, we're going to first invest in her green tree, Brawl, all the way down to the capstone, because what it does is essentially give her an Athena/Zero style melee dash towards an enemy, because of course. This special melee attack deals double damage, and it has an 8-second cooldown, but if you manage to kill someone with it, it resets the cooldown, allowing you to instantly do it again, because again, of course. In order to get there, we're going to need to take personal space, which increases our gun damage by up to 36% based on how close we are to an enemy. Since you're going to be literally dashing into people with your melee, you're going to be near them quite often, which means this is a really good perk to get. You'll get a lot of decent uptime on it. Then we'll put 2 points into Clarity for a bit of health regen, which is always good for a melee focused character, but we're mainly putting these points here to get us down the tree. We then want to put 3 points into Samsara, or Samsara, or Samsara. I don't really know how to pronounce it because in English, you people have no indication of how you're supposed to pronounce something. Anyway, this increases our gun damage and gives us health regen for 20 seconds based on how many enemies we hit with our action skill. We then max out Helping Hands, which gives us 40% damage reduction after we use our action skill, and also just makes you look badass since it leaves the spectral arms floating around you afterwards. We then want to pick up all 3 of these skills: Mindfulness, Find Your Center, and Vigor. Mindfulness gives you a stack whenever you take damage, which increases your move speed and reduces your shield recharge delay. Find Your Center literally just doubles your melee damage, and after you use your action skill, it nearly doubles your melee range. Vigor grants you and your team a move speed buff after you get a kill with your action skill, and hopefully you'll be able to get those quite easily and quite often with some skills from other trees that we're going to talk about later on. We then want to put a point in Do Unto Others, as it's basically just free damage. I'm assuming it works just like the capstone from Krieg's Hellborn tree in Borderlands 2, which fired homing fireballs at enemies whenever they damaged you. We then want to put 5 points into Jab Cross, which increases our gun damage by 15% and our action skill damage by 75% for 10 seconds after you deal melee damage. You don't even have to get a melee kill, just landing a melee hit will increase your action skill damage by 75%. This, combined with everything else that we're going to talk about, basically ensures that you one-shot something and you kill something, or at least very close to, with your Face Slam. And finally, we get our capstone, our Blitz melee dash ability. Moving on to our second blue tree, Mystical Assault, we want to take Do Harm, which introduces the rush stacks mechanic. Basically, killing enemies gives you rush stacks. The stacks give you different buffs from different skills that you spec'd into, and the amount of the buff will correspond to how many stacks you consumed. And you consume rush stacks by using your action skill. So basically, you kill enemies, you stack up rush, you use your action skill, which in turn procs all the rush buffs you had for about 20 seconds, which allows you to kill more enemies, to build up more stacks, to use your action skill once it's off cooldown, rinse, and repeat. Like I was saying, we want Do Harm because it will increase Amara's action skill damage based on how many rush stacks you consumed. We then want to take at least 1 point into Violent Tapestry to increase our rush stack cap by 10. At least that's what I think it does, based on the wording. If it doesn't, then there's no point and you can just put this 1 point wherever else you would like. It literally doesn't make any difference. We then take Transcend, which increases our critical hit damage by 27% and our weapon accuracy by 38% after we use our action skill. And because we want to be using our action skill as often as possible, we'll also take 5 points into Restless, which gives us 25% action skill cooldown rate. Getting this far down the tree also means we get to choose the Soul Sap Augment, which gives you a 30% lifesteal from damage dealt from your action skill. And to boost that even further, we're going to put one last point in this tree into Ascendant, which buffs Soul Sap's leech effects by 20%, giving us a massive 50% lifesteal on our action skill. With the last few points we have, we can go into Amara's red tree, and here you can pick either Anima or Infusion. The choice is up to you. It doesn't really matter. The one skill from this tree that you do want is Illuminated Fist, which increases your melee damage by 75%, and it turns your melee to deal elemental damage based on your action skill's element. Speaking of which, getting to this row also means that you have the option to choose the fire element for your action skill, which means that now you have all 3 elements available to you at any given time for you to swap between, which I figure is going to be very important for Amara, considering that she is all about elemental damage, or that so many of her skills revolve around the one chosen element that you have. Overall, this build seems like it's going to be a really solid general add clear build and just something to use while you're playing through the game in general. Your game plan consists of shooting enemies to get them weak enough to finish off with a dash punch, which granted won't really seem that difficult considering the absurd amount of melee damage that she gets from her skill trees. Nevertheless, you'll get your dash punch, reset the cooldown, which will allow you to keep going from enemy to enemy. You have your increased move speed to move around enemy groups, proccing your kill skills, and then if you ever run into a badass or a group of enemies, you can activate your action skill, consume up all those rush stacks to absolutely clap everything, and then once your action skill is done, you have all these buffs residually from your trees that give you bonuses after you've used your action skill, which in turn allows you to get more kills and get even more rush stacks and just keep the chain going. I don't know how this build is going to fare versus raid bosses though. I don't think it will, but I just hope that the action skill damage is significant enough that it will be able to kill enemies in the endgame. Because if the damage is anything like ability damage from previous games, like in Borderlands 2, I'm not so sure if this is going to be playable at all. But since Borderlands 3 does seem to be a different style, at least in terms of combat, I'm not too worried about that at the moment. If it does end up being trash, I do have a secondary build for Amara that is more reminiscent of Maya from Borderlands 2, and it might be even better than her for boss encounters. For this one, we're going to want to work our way down the Mystical Assault capstone, which lets us recast our action skill one time while it's cooling down, essentially giving us 2 charges of our action skill. It also increases our rush stack cap by 10, and if we kill an enemy with our action skill, it refunds half of our rush stacks. Before we do that though, we need to go down the red tree to pick up the action skill we're going to be using, Phase Grasp, and its augments, which are Ties That Bind and Allure. Phase Grasp locks an enemy in place exactly the same way Maya's Phase Lock worked, and the Allure augment creates a singularity that pulls enemies closer to the one enemy that you trap, exactly how Maya's Converge augment worked. However, on top of all of that, Ties That Bind tethers all enemies near the Phase Lock target, and whatever damage you deal to any linked enemies will be shared among all linked enemies, which sounds amazing. If you've ever played Destiny or are familiar with how the Hunter class's Shadow Shot works from that game, this will all make sense to you as it's pretty much exactly that. To start our way down the tree, we're going to put 5 points into Infusion, which converts a portion of our gun's damage into the element of our action skill. This is also mainly to move us down the tree, but it is a nice bonus considering how much elemental damage we are going to be putting on this build. We then take 5 points into Tempest, which increases our overall elemental damage and takes it a bit step further for shock damage as well. And then we take Dread, which increases our gun damage by 15% after we phase grasp an enemy, and it also auto reloads your weapon if you kill them, which is nice, I guess. Now we can go back to Mystical Assault. We want to put 3 points into Fast Hands, which just gives you some reload speed, weapon swap speed, and mode switch speed buffs. We also want to put 4 points into Violent Tapestry so that we can move down the tree later on. We once again want to take Transcend, Restless, and especially Ascendant, as that will double the range of the Singularity effect of Allure. After that, we want to put 3 points into Laid Bare, which will increase the damage enemies take by 25% after being damaged by Amara's action skill. I just personally hope that this actually procs with the use of Phase Grasp, since it doesn't actually deal any damage by pulling the person up unless the enemy is physically unable to be pulled up. Either way, you'll want it for bosses, as I'm sure you won't be able to grasp them, but the bonus damage they take from all sources will surely come in handy, since when an enemy can't be phase locked, they do instantly just take damage, which will definitely proc this. Combined with that, you'll also want Wrath, which increases your gun damage by 20% and an additional 20% for 8 seconds after you've activated your action skill. You then want to take Awakening, which will increase the buffs and effects that rush stacks give you by 30%, which is fantastic. And finally, our capstone. You can spend the 7 points you have left however which way you want, but I recommend you go down the green tree and pick up personal space and a few levels of clarity so that you can have the option to choose corrosive damage for your action skill. I put 1 point into Helping Hands just because it looks sick as fuck. This build is all about crowd control, CCing a tough enemy, which will group up a bunch of the random adds around him, tethering them, blasting them with elemental damage, and watching them all die at the same time. You'll be using your Phase Grasp all the time since you can essentially cast it twice, which means if you time it right, it'll pretty much be up permanently. And since that debuffs enemies affected by it and buffs your own damage output, it sounds like an amazing setup for bosses. And that about wraps up Amara. I'll be back tomorrow with a video on Flak. Hopefully have all the Vault Hunters done by the end of the week as well. If you guys enjoyed this video, then be sure to leave a like, as it really does help me out a ton, and let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for the build itself, or let me know what you guys would like to see in the next video, which Vault Hunter I should do next, or just what type of content you would like to see on the channel. Anyways, I hope you guys have been well, and I will talk to you all later. Take care.